All right, so I know a lot of people who watch my channel, and if you're watching this video, are often here because you want to learn how to shoot and capture live sports. While that's great and all, something I'm really passionate about, something I'm also very passionate about is storytelling and documentary filmmaking, specifically, yes, in the sports world. And one skill that I really do think any filmmaker or videographer should know is how to light a proper interview. Because if you've ever seen any kind of content like Drive to Survive, Breakpoint, Full Swing, any, documentary style video series on Netflix or any other streaming service, you've probably seen really nice, well-lit interviews. And for a lot of people who are just shooting live sporting events, shooting an interview can be a very intimidating thing to do. But in my opinion, the next step on your journey as a sports creative is learning how to tell a story. And the best way to often do this in the sports world is through on-camera interviews with your athletes. Earlier in the year, I challenged myself to do a 10 short film series with 10 different athletes to practice my long form storytelling. And I have actually learned so much through this process, having shot 3 of these already, and also a long form documentary that I've been working on for the past year on how lighting an interview can be a very simple process, but also can be a very intimidating one, especially if you've never done one before. So I want to take you guys through my process on how I light and kind of build around these interviews that I've been doing. I try my best to do this with minimal setup as possible. I know on YouTube here, you're going to see a ton of talented filmmakers create these very intense looking, very complicated looking book lights and different kinds of setups. But for me, especially in sports where you don't really have a lot of time to work with these athletes one-on-one at certain points in the season or in the year, I try my best to keep the setups as minimal and as easy as possible. And something that I think people in the sporting world, especially if you don't have a lot of lighting gear to begin with, will really appreciate it and take away a lot from. And that isn't knocking anyone on YouTube showcasing these more intricate lighting setups, but I do know for those beginners who maybe just have one light and a dome, that's not really possible. So I'm going to show you 2 different examples of how I light interviews in 2 very different environments with minimal lighting setups, and something that is very easy and simple to replicate as long as you're willing to invest a little bit of money into a good light and a good diffusion source. For the record, there is so much more to actually doing an interview than just setting up a nice light and a nice camera. There is the pre-production aspect of it all. There's the actual conducting of the interview, doing research to come up with questions for your talent. And there's also even audio and how to set up microphones, which are all different topics that if there's a lot of interest following this video, I'm more than happy to make a series on this, on how to shoot interviews with athletes from start to finish, from lighting to camera setup to audio, etc., etc. So if that's something you're interested in, please let me know in the comments down below. So the first interview setup I'm going to do is this one right here of Mike Malott, who is a UFC athlete. This is a longer form documentary that I've been working on for the better part of a year. And we did interviews again like a year ago, and we recently redid them a few weeks ago. And I really liked the way I did the lighting on this one compared to the first one. And I'm going to explain why. I'm going to show you guys using diagrams here on my iPad, but I'm also going to show you guys on the day of something that me and my friend Michael did before the interview, just kind of breaking down the lighting setup, showing what each light does and how we actually physically set it up with some behind the scenes footage. All right, first things first, whenever I get into these situations of having to create an interview frame, I'm going to A, set up my camera to get the frame first, and then B, I'm going to kill all the house lights to be able to have full control over how I want to light the scene. However, the challenge in this scenario is that even though we did this at the end of a practice and there was supposed to be no one else in the building, we had a few people who were still practicing and getting some extra training in. So these house lights here, which you're going to notice, we weren't able to kill. And I know people in the mainstream film world might give me some flack, but in sports, sometimes you have to roll with the punches, literally and figuratively. But it's something that at times you just have to be flexible with, especially if it's a shared facility where other people are training, other events are happening. So in this case, we had to deal with the fact that we had 2 house lights on, but it actually worked for our benefit because they act as practicals in the scene, making it a little bit more intriguing. And we also set up a hair light that gave us a little bit of a glow on the back of his shoulder and the back of his head here. And so it's actually motivating the light that seems to be coming from those 2 house lights there that you see. So it wasn't necessarily the whole end of the world. Now, the first thing I want to talk about the lights we're actually to set up and control was our key light, which we had just off screen right here. And this one is setting up that really nice soft light that you're going to see on the left side of his face, which is our key light. So this key light was the Zhiyun 500 watt light, along with a Aputure light dome. The light dome essentially allows us to add diffusion and a honeycomb attachment in order to get this really soft look on his face. And typically when you're recording and shooting any kind of interview, the softer the light, the better, especially it is for kind of taking away the imperfections on your talent's skin and just looking overall more appeasing than a more harsh source of light. That's why a lot of the times you're going to see people with these really big domes or these really big diffusion setups to get that light looking as soft as possible. The key light in this case was set up on a C-stand at about a 45-degree angle from our subject, and the reason the 45-degree angle is important is because it allows us to get this natural contrast and fall off of the light on his face to create a shadow side here on the right side of his face. The reason having shadow is so important is because it creates a contrast on the image and on the face of your subject, and it allows for a more interesting image versus if their face was just all lit up in general and it was very flat looking. And a really big thing to know here, especially if you've never shot an interview before, is make sure your camera is on the shadow side of your subject. Now, this was a mistake I used to do a ton, was just shooting into the light side of my subject's face because I thought that made sense as to why I'm letting it. But when you start doing this a little more, you're going to start to realize that shooting on the shadow side provides a much more interesting image and a much more dynamic image, something that has a little bit more depth, especially when you start messing around with more than one light. So again, if you're just doing this for the first time, or if you've been doing this mistake for a while, do your best to always try and set up your camera on your shadow side of your subject for just a more interesting and dynamic looking image. The second light we used was actually up and behind our subject to act as a bit of a rim light slash hair light. And what we actually had, it was a Pavo Tube right here, the Nanlite Pavo Tube 30C. And just write that there, Nanlite. And the Nanlite Pavo Tube 30C, like I said, is acting like a bit of a kicker light. What that does is that it's hitting the back of our subject. And like I said before, you're kind of seeing it on the back of his shoulder. You're seeing a little bit on the top of his head, just to give him some separation from the background here, just so he doesn't completely fall off into darkness as the light travels across his body. Now, one thing to note here with this backlight is that it is behind him enough and high enough to the fact that it's not acting as a fill light, because like I said, I want this side of his face to still act like the shadow side. Even though, yes, the backlight does hit him a little bit on the ear and on the back of his neck, it's not enough to start hitting the shadow side of his face. And that's good, because all I want this to do is to pop him off the background a little bit and not impact the rest of the image too much. And the other thing you're going to notice is that this is at a slightly warmer color temperature than our key light. Our key light right here was set to in and around 5600 Kelvin, which is daylight balance. And then the Nanlite here, I can't remember the exact white balance I used, but it was set anywhere from 2500 Kelvin to probably around 3000 Kelvin to make it a lot warmer than our key light. The reason I'm using two different color temperatures is to create color contrast on him. There's light contrast, which we talked about when it came to the shadow side of the image, but there's also color contrast where you're gonna have two different colors either blending together or clashing to create a specific look. In this case, I wanted the cooler light on the left side to be much more forgiving on his skin tone. And then on the right side with the 2500 to 3000 Kelvin Nanlite, it's doing two things. Number one, it's giving him that warm, subtle glow that we talked about that allows him to pop off the background, and that contrasts really nicely and subtly with the cooler light you see on this side. But the other thing, those house lights we talked about before that we couldn't turn off, they're acting as a motivating source for this Nanlite. So even though the light coming this way looks like it's coming from the house lights, they're actually coming from that Pavo Tube we set up behind him. There was actually another motivating light source that we couldn't get rid of, and that's a window that was up on the left side of our screen that we just could not flag. And that's a really big reason as to why 5600 Kelvin was the color temperature of choice for our key light, because the light coming this way acts like it's coming from a window. I needed it to kind of match that color temperature, which was 5600 Kelvin. The final light that we used was actually for our background and on our subject, and that was an Aputure 300D that actually was at a lower angle on the ground right off screen here. And what that light is doing is just adding a splash of level to the room, where you can see in the background around him, we have that light pointing behind him in order to bring up the light in the room. And the biggest thing for me here was the first time I shot these interviews a long time ago, that year ago where we did it originally, the background was much darker. And so when I looked at it again, I said, the next time I do this, I want to add more levels to the room. I think this 300D was set to like 30 to 40% intensity, so it wasn't full pop because I wanted to play around with it. I didn't want it to be too artificially lit, but I wanted to make it seem like that window on the side was bringing light into the image. So not only is it important to light your subject properly, but also making sure you're lighting your environment properly to tell the right story is just as important in this whole process. Now, I could sit here and diagram this out like a high school football coach all night long, but instead of doing that, I want to take you guys actually to the day of, where we did shoot a little bit of a breakdown showcasing what each light actually does in that scenario and what kind of was behind our mentality when using these lights in this specific situation. All right, we have Michael here. Say hi, Michael. Michael is my stand-in for today. I'm just gonna break down the lighting setup and everything. So we're gonna turn off everything first, and then we're gonna go one at a time. Michael loves being on camera. You can stop waving, Michael. This is what our house lighting is. We have one set of lights that we just couldn't turn off, and sometimes you're gonna have to deal with that. So then I'm gonna go one by one. We have a little bit of light on his left side of the face coming from the window, and this is where we throw up our key light to kind of emulate that and match that. So once we turn this guy on, and I just turned it on and it didn't turn on. There we go. Now the light turns on. This is our key light. This is a Zhiyun. I'm going to put the name of the light on the screen because it's up top, but shout out Nicole Shapiro for lending me this light to try out. 500 watt light, really nice. So you can see, balances it out, a lot of fill on his face right here. And then we have the shadow side here where both our cameras are placed shadow side. Our subject is going to be looking right over here to the left side of the camera. And then we're gonna also now turn on our backlight, which is a Nanlite Pavo tube, boomed overhead. And as you can see, it adds a little bit of top light to the top of his head and also a small rim light kind of on the back of his shoulder here. And so I'm gonna just turn off the key light so you can kind of see what that looks like. Again, it's just a very subtle light and it's a little warmer to make Michael look big and deezed, because he's wrestling a lot now. And then we have the 300D Mark II at around 50% splashing the background just to fill up the lights a little more. And this is how we accomplish this look. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to say. Thanks, Michael. Shout out to my guy, Michael, for being my guinea pig in that scenario and being a champ in front of the camera. And also shout out to my friend Nicole for actually lending me that Zhiyun light. Without these two, this project would not be possible. So make sure to give them some love down below. I'll leave their links in the description as well. Here's a really quick second example of a diagram I built a while ago for a different shoot we did earlier this summer with a race car athlete. This is actually the second film in my short film series, which will hopefully be coming out very soon once I get through the whole post-production process. But this diagram is a really, really simple one just to explain how to do this in a much smaller room. Now, while the interview with Mike Malott was done in a big UFC gym, this one with my friend Mac was shot in a very small bedroom. And so we had much less space to play with, but the setup is essentially still the same. In this case, we have the Aputure 300D and Light Dome combination as our key light, acting as the key on the same side the window is in the frame in his bedroom, motivating the light from the window to look like it's lighting the left side of his face, which means our shadow side is again on the right side and on camera side as well. Other than the 300D, you could probably guess that we have the PavoTube 30C up and above our subject to act as a bit of a rim hair light on that right side. And the one difference in this sheet is that we actually have to use a little bit of neg to add some contrast back on the right side of his face. Neg is usually a black fabric or something black that will just take light away from an image. So in this case, I actually didn't have fabric. I didn't have my 5-in-1 reflector. I didn't have a flag or anything like that. So what I ended up doing was just going to Mac's garage, getting some black garbage bags and taping them on the C-stand, and it did the job. And you can tell very much here on the right side of his face, there's a lot more contrast, there's a lot more shadow here, and that wouldn't have been possible without using that black garbage bag in order to take away some of that light and adding that contrast on the right side of his face. Now, to the seasoned filmmaker here on YouTube, I know that this looks very bare bones, and it really is, because I truly do believe in less is more. And working in sports, there's the particular caveat that you're not either going to have the space that you want, the control of the space that you're in, or really the time to do what you really want. Athletes are very busy people, and oftentimes you have to bend towards their schedule. It's very different from traditional commercial and film at times in that way. And in both situations, we had something like that impacting the time or the way we wanted to shoot this. With Mike Malott, we had to deal with the fact that we didn't have full control of the house lights, and also we were on a bit of a time crunch. And then with Mac here, we had a little bit more time, but we were dealing with a smaller space. So in situations like this, less is definitely more. And I think these are two really good examples of how you can create really sharp looking, really attractive looking interview frames with as much minimal setup as possible. These are two films that I'm very excited to eventually share with you guys because they're very different from what I've done in the past. There is some kind of live sport capture elements in both of these films and documentaries, but at the same time, I'm really trying to take my documentary filmmaking skills to the next level with these two projects. So stay tuned, as I really hope to release some of these in the coming future. And that does it for today's video. I know it was a bit of a different kind of breakdown and something that you guys aren't really used to on this channel, but I'm really trying my best to dip into my cinematographer bag here and showcase different things and highlight different parts of this industry, because like I said at the start, you're not always going to just be shooting live sports. Eventually, when you work with sports organizations or athletes, they're going to want storytelling content like this, and skills like these are really important to learn and try out, especially when you're just starting off and learning and have the ability to practice at those lower levels. Now, I know I primarily focused in this video about talking on the light setups, and I didn't really talk about cameras, lenses, or audio, but that's because I wasn't really sure how this is gonna fit into my main line of content on this channel. But because it's still sports related, I definitely wanna make more videos on this topic and on this kind of series of how to shoot interviews. So if you guys wanna know more about the cameras, the lenses, or how I captured the audio, just leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you wanna see, and I will make corresponding videos based off of those replies. And that does it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you made it to this part, thank you guys for sticking with me. If you guys really enjoyed today's video, if you learned something new, please give me a like down below and subscribe, as I would really appreciate it. And make sure if you guys have any questions at all about the content or the gear, etc., leave me a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer it as soon as I can. And that does it for me in this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace out.